which is instant. So we'll just give it a couple seconds.
Yep.
Okay. Hey everybody, I'm here with game developer Aya. Is that the right way to pronounce it?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a really interesting story today that I have some involvement with as well, but not nearly as much as you. Beast Fury it was a very interesting kind of experiment. I wouldn't even know if I would call it a game fully, because it didn't really reach that point. But why don't we start from the beginning? So please tell me about like how you started in the game industry.
Well, I started in the game industry. I was actually browsing one day, and happened to be browsing on SRK. And there was mention of a Dujin fighting game, which was called Monster. And for some reason, it happened to be mentioned on the front page of the website. I have no idea why, but I decided to check the game out. I played the game. I thought it was garbage. And I felt like the game had a lot of potential. So I had to go through a lot of lengths to actually find the creator of the game, because for some reason I felt compelled to talk to him. And I talked to him. He was a really nice guy. And then when we got to the topic of what I thought of the game, I let him know. And then that was literally my foray into getting into game design. He asked me to beta test for him for a little while, for about a couple of months. I did that. And then he asked me to come on and help him design the game. Because he was like, well, you have good knowledge of fighting games and well, you're honest. So, because a lot of his staff wasn't, at least in the sense of things that they felt that could be changed. So I came on to that, and that's basically where I got involved in game design. So that's basically my origin.
Mm-hmm.
That was back in 2005, 2006.
Okay. So that led you to get some kind of work elsewhere?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I got to do work for a lot of different groups, actually. Had a great time, actually, with a lot of the work, and Japan and all that. That was awesome. Now, probably, at least in that context, wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for working on Monster. So that was cool. But that's a topic for another time. But I got to work on a variety of different projects since that time. And I mean, it's 2018 now, so that was like 12, 13 years ago. So it was a long time. And I worked on Monster for like 6 years. Well, I was still working on other projects too, but Monster I worked on for 6 years. And we got location tests, and we got an arcade variation of the game, which was awesome and stuff like that. So we, in a way, we were kind of like Skullgirls before Skullgirls.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty sweet.
Okay, so yeah, you got a lot of how did our main topic for today, how did he reach out to you, and how did he find you?
Well, so he found me through the Facebook page of Monster. He had messaged me. Apparently, he had actually messaged me a year before I actually even saw the message. Before I just hadn't seen the message. I was dealing with a lot of stuff at the time, and I wasn't really on social media. So because of that, I wouldn't have seen it. And then somehow, like a year later, he messaged out again. Don't know why, but he did. And he asked me he said that he was a really big fan of my work, and that he wanted me to take a look at his game, which was, of course, Beast Fury. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, sure. I'll take a look at it. I, at this time, had no intention of working on the project. I had no intention of working on any project. But I took a look at Beast Fury. I thought that it had a nice idea, but it was clearly handled by, well, honestly, people who didn't know anything about design. So I offered a few suggestions on it.
So, okay, to clarify, he contacted you, and his name is what is his name?
Ryhan Stevens.
Ryhan Stevens. Okay, I always couldn't know how to pronounce that because the name's
because of the H.
Yeah. Okay. But so Ryan contacted you on Facebook and said he wanted help with the game. Like, what was the message exactly?
Initially, he just asked for me to check it out and to give my opinion. There was no initial thought of me becoming part of the project.
Okay.
I had actually even made it clear that at that time I was going through a lot of stuff and I wasn't really interested in working on a project.
Okay.
But as we'll go into, he is incredibly persistent.
Okay.
And irritating.
Yeah. So you downloaded the game, you played it, you thought, well, okay, the design here, there's potential, but the design is just not there. And so you
it was very poor. Okay. The guy who was at the time who was responsible for the design, his name was Andrew Fine. He's actually a competitive Street Fighter player. But he was the guy who was handling the design at the time. And Andrew wasn't very knowledgeable on design. He was pretty decent at Street Fighter at playing it, but playing a game and being a good designer are very, very, very different things.
Yeah.
And I was like, the game is, kind of flat. That was my biggest critique, is that the game was flat. I was like, okay, you guys want to do something more traditional, but on the scale of that traditional, you kind of hang on to it like there's nothing else there. So you basically have like furry characters in a traditional fighter, which if you don't have something that stands out and that's unique, people are going to pretty much ignore anyway. Because furry fighters fighting games already in themselves are niche, right? So a furry fighter is even more niche. It's like, whoa. And I was just like, well, if you're going to design a furry fighter, I think you might want to punch it up a little bit. So he asked if I would talk to his designer, which was Andrew. This was actually before I ever met Andrew, but he asked if I would talk to Andrew. And I said, if he wants to talk and get some advice, I'm more than willing to give him some advice. And so that's what happened. Andrew reached out. He messaged me on Skype. He said, hey, man, Ryan told me that, that I should talk to you if you can give me some advice with the design of the game. And so after talking with Andrew, I find out that Andrew was not very satisfied with the design of the game either. And he wanted to essentially scrap the initial idea of design and start completely from scratch. Which honestly, I was in favor of, but this was prior to my knowledge of the fact that a Kickstarter existed, or that, because again, I wasn't digging that deep into it. I was just kind of giving advice, and I was, so I told Andrew that if that was something he wanted to do, then great. You should tell Ryan and then scrap this and then start over and make a better idea, a game or whatever. And if you need any suggestions, feel free to hit me up. So after that conversation with Andrew, I didn't talk to them for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. Amount of time had passed by, and honestly, I had just kind of forgotten about the game. I completely forgot.
Because Ryan just contacted you to be like, hey, you've given advice before on fighting games and led to, eventually making some pretty good design decisions. So he reached out to you, just assuming that you would, well, to you, it just seemed like, oh, I'll just give him some advice on his game. I mean, I've done that in the past, and
right.
Yeah.
So I just went about my business. I didn't really think about it. And I got contacted by Ryan again. And he made it seem like it was just a, hey, how's it going, kind of thing. So I was like, oh, cool. I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, yeah, I'm doing all right, man. At the time I was in the middle of writing the story for my game that I'm currently working on. But at the time I was in the middle of that. And he had started kind of, I guess, buzzing in my ear a little bit. That's what I'll call He was like, so I don't know if you knew this, and this is when he brought up the Kickstarter that they had at that time very recently gotten funded. I think it was like 50K or something like that they had gotten for the game. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that you guys were this far along. Like, you know what I mean? Like, other than like the little demo that they had, which was only like Vincent and Don, you know, the fox and the shark. Like, other than that, which was very rough to begin with, but I mean, the sprites were great, I thought. And I assumed that he had put up some serious bank for those sprites because those are like almost not, I wouldn't say Blaze Blue level spriting, but they were pretty freaking good. And I was like, oh man, this guy must be putting up some serious dough to get that kind of stuff. And they had like a whole animated intro thing. I didn't even know that was a thing. I was like, oh, you guys are way further along than I thought.
Yeah.
Because you know what I mean? I was like, whoa, like this, okay. You know, so the gears in my head kind of started turning a little bit. I was like, well, if these guys got, you know, money and they're looking for whatever, okay. But I wasn't going to be like, well, you know, you should put me on your game. I wasn't about that because I still hadn't really committed to the idea of working on a project.
Yeah. But the possibility, now it went from, I'm just going to do some advice for this kind of indie game that, you know, maybe 4 years down the line is going to turn into something. It's now looking more like something that might, you know, turn into a career opportunity, right?
Right, because they had a successful Kickstarter. I mean, you've been on Kickstarter, you know how hard it is.
Yep.
So, so it's like you've been on there, you know. So to me, it's like, oh, you guys had a successful Kickstarter. Like, oh, okay, this is a real thing. Like it wasn't like you guys were just dabbling. You guys actually had something. Come to find out, and I'll explain what this means later, but them having a successful Kickstarter was ironically the worst case scenario. And I'll explain what that means in a bit. But yeah, they had a successful Kickstarter. I was like, oh man, and a successful Indiegogo. And I was like, oh wow, okay, cool.
So
but, okay.
Do you know the specifics on how quickly the Indiegogo came after the Kickstarter?
So actually, that's interesting. The Indiegogo actually came before the Kickstarter. Okay. I was under the assumption that it came after initially, like you were just now. But the Indiegogo was done in 2013. The Kickstarter was done 2015. I think I'm remembering that right.
Okay.
I think I'm remembering that right.
Yeah, and the Indiegogo made them how much? Because you mentioned the Kickstarter money, but was it a substantial amount?
The Indiegogo was like 30 grand.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was like 30 grand. And excuse me, the Kickstarter was about 50. So I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So I decided, and I had spoken with like a lot of people about whether or not I should, you know, kind of get into it. A couple of friends of mine who were actually backers of Beast Fury on both Indiegogo and Kickstarter were like, hey man, yeah, we think it's going to be great, and it'd be even better if you were working on it. Plus, people knew me from working on Monster. So it would actually bring like an extra notoriety to the game because I had already kind of built up this reputation from working on Monster. So it was like, okay, cool. So I said, all right, it's about time I got on my rut. So I decided, let's roll the dice. Let's see what happens. They seem to have money because they got 2 successfully funded campaigns.
Yep. Okay.
Now, I should, and I know this now, but at the time, I should have took that as a red flag. Because what happened to the first campaign money? You know?
Yeah.
It's.
I mean, it's just a question of why did they have to? Did they just think that the or whatever one came first? Did they just expect more and then didn't get it, so they just ran a second campaign?
But then the second question I should have asked is why did they do a separate campaign on 2 different platforms?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that seems weird. I would want to know too.
It was weird.
Yeah.
And I was, for some reason, because I myself hadn't been at that time well versed in any of the crowdfunding stuff.
Mhm.
So to me, it was, oh, cool. You know, these guys, they're getting funded. They got money. Okay, great. And then when I talked to Ryan about it, and I talked to him in detail, when I talked to him about it, he was a smooth talker. You know, he was like, yeah, we got this. And he showed me like their animations that they've got for the cut scenes that they have in the game. And they look sweet. I was like, wow. Okay. Now, that aside, my common sense brain was like, this can't be cheap. Okay. Because getting animation done is a very expensive endeavor. Like, very expensive. I mean, for some companies, just to get like a 5-minute thing is anywhere from 15 to 20 grand. And that's on the low end.
By that point, Skullgirls had their Indiegogo as well, right? So that had a very detailed breakdown of how much animation costs. So this isn't even private knowledge that designers only know. This is something that like everyone can kind of look up, because I think that some of the animations here are borderlining on like how many frames and stuff they have, something like Skullgirls. So it would be at least around that price, maybe cheaper, but like around that price, which is really expensive. Way more.
It's really expensive. So if you're looking at that and then you go, well, you guys only got 30 grand off of the Indiegogo, right? So if you're spending 10 grand, that's 20 grand left. And of course, that's not to count how much money that they take out for you getting your thing funded. So it's like, you're probably not sitting on that 30 grand. You know, you're probably sitting with maybe 26 or 27. So I'm like, if you're spending 10 to 15 grand on animation, that's not leaving you with a lot of money. You know, it's just leaving you with like no money.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, but maybe the animations were done before that camp. I didn't know the logistics. I just knew what he was showing me.
Right. So what did Ryan tell you when you kind of started bringing this up?
When I asked him, he actually indeed did tell me that the animations had been done prior and were used as a promotional tool to promote the Indiegogo or to promote the game and this and other. And the animations that he had done, he had a 1-minute animation done. And it was incredibly detailed. So it wasn't cheap. Couldn't have been. Because I can't imagine someone doing that level of detail and animation for pro bono. I can't imagine it. Like, unless this person was just sold every dream that someone ever had. You know, like I can't imagine that was the case. You know? So he was telling me that it was done beforehand. And then I said, okay, well, I guess then it would make sense. And then I asked him what the money for the Indiegogo went to. And he was like, well, it went to, the game, making the game and doing the in-game spriting and this and other. And I had no reason to question it based on the fact that, considering from the Indiegogo to the Kickstarter, things had actually dramatically improved. I had no reason to question it. So I went, okay, all right, that makes sense. What I should have did was I should have reached out to the developer, the person who was developing the game at the time. That's not what I did. And, you know, that's kind of like egg on my face kind of thing. I should have done that. Should have did my due diligence. So I decided, all right, I'll roll the dice and we'll see what we can come up. So Andrew had actually asked me to help him redesign the game because he was stumped. He didn't know what to do, what kind of a system that he wanted to incorporate or anything of the sort. And I said, sure. All right, fine. And I said, I'm going to talk with Ryan, quote, for the time that I'm going to spend on this. So I did. And he said it was fine. He said, we're good. All right. I had then sent him a contract because I'm an independent contractor. So it makes sense that I'd have my own contract. I had then sent him a contract stating the outline of the work and this, that, and the other. And he said that he would get it back to me when he had the opportunity to scan it in and send it back, which only required an electronic signature, but whatever. Okay. So I then said, all right, let's get cracking. So me and Andrew started talking about the design of the game, and I looked at every one of his ideas that he had, and he was like, the only reason I even came up with this is because Ryan was like, well, this is what I want. And I was like, well, this is, I don't think this is going to work. And he was like, yeah, I don't think so either. So he was like, he kind of was just literally stumped. And so I essentially just grabbed the reins and redesigned myself. I redesigned everything from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And the new idea was way better. And I'm not tooting my own horn by saying that. I'm only saying that the old idea was so bad that anything else would have been better. So we did that, but of course, with anything, there needs to be a proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I had no. I was not intending to be a developer for the game. I had no desire to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was perfectly fine with the consulting and the design role, which is what I prefer.
Mm-hmm. And that's what the contract said as well?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what the contract said.
Mm-hmm.
I was very clear about that I did not want to be a developer. I was not a dev.
Mm-hmm.
I was a designer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And even then, I didn't even charge. I charged a much lower rate than what I would normally charge for that, because I felt like I was just kind of getting back into it, and it didn't seem right to be like overcharge for stuff or whatever. Like, it just didn't seem right to that. So, but I did want to get paid for my time because I'm working, and you know how it is to design a game. So designing a game requires a lot of time,
mm-hmm.
you know? And I spent a very long time redesigning the game and the concepts in which that they wanted to implement into the game, while it made sense, because I didn't want to overcomplicate it, because when you add too much, then you kind of create analysis paralysis with the players. They're just like, I can't follow what is going on. Right. So there was a period in time where we had to go through the whole remove this, add this, remove this stage. But that's more into the actual dev cycle than it is about Ryan. So, so I'd sent my first draft to Ryan of what my envisionment of Beast Fury should have been, or rather should be, kind of to its title. Mm-hmm. Beast Fury. So I had actually designed a game with the name of the game in mind, although I wanted to change the name, but not my call. The game had already been branded as Beast. It wasn't like it would have been wise to change it at that point. Mm-hmm. Although I got some advice otherwise that told me that, but I'll go into that later.
Yeah.
So, after I redesigned it, he said, "Oh, dude, this is sweet. I love all of this stuff. This is great. Drew couldn't do anything like this." No disrespect to Drew, but that's what he said. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, well, I've also been working this much longer than him, so you can't be too hard on him. And I was like, this is his first dance. Like my first dance, I wasn't, I had 2 left feet just like everyone else did, So, moving forward from there, we started talking to, there was kind of like investors or companies that were interested in the IP/game. And this part I was kind of skeptical on, mm-hmm. But it turned out to be true. There were actually people who were interested and invested in who were interested and wanted to become investors, or were interested in investing in the title of Beast Fury. There were several. One was a Chinese company, actually, and there were several American companies that were interested in the title. And I thought that I thought it was all BS, but it wasn't. It was actually 100% true. And
so why did you think that was 100% BS? Because at this point,
because if we were redesigning the game, there was no notice to people that the game was getting redesigned. There was no info to that.
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't said anything about that until afterwards.
Okay.
So I'm like, why would people want to invest in a product that hasn't, been proven yet? That was, but they were basing it off of what they saw.
Yeah, they probably saw 2 successful crowdfunding campaigns, and they saw that as interest in, or I assume, right. Yeah, because I don't know if they're really like, I don't know if they needed a design, actual like game that they could play to necessarily fund it.
Right. It was, but they saw the campaigns,
mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, all right. And one of those companies was actually WayForward.
Oh, okay.
They were interested in the product, mm-hmm. And I was floored by that, honestly, that they were interested in it, but they were. And there were talks and talks and talks and talks, but it ended up falling through. The reason I can't really go into, but it fell through, and it was on Ryan's end, as the moral of the story is. It was on his end. He bought something really important, and then after that, they essentially all interest melted away.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. All interest, at least from them. Other companies were so interested. At least WayForward. They were like, nah. No, we're done. We're out of here.
As a result of buying something important.
No, I said he did something. He messed something up.
Oh, okay.
That he wasn't supposed to.
Gotcha.
And because of that, they bowed out.
Got it.
But I can't. Again, I'm not going to go into the specifics of what happened. But that's he basically blew it.
Okay.
Which again is the moral of the story. Mm-hmm. So there was a few other companies, and this is kind of where this is where things kind of started turning. And by that I mean where things started getting like really, really bad. And this is where the exploitation kind of starts taking over.
Yeah, before you go on there, so did Ryan pay you at any point at this point? Like, how long is the time where you were doing, redesigning the whole game, and it's up to this point that you're about to go into? How long of a period was that?
It was about 2.5 months.
Okay.
From the time that I started on the redesign.
Okay. And was
basically from the ground up. Yeah. At that time.
And was Ryan actually paying you, or was that?
So no, he hadn't paid me yet, and he hadn't even signed the contract.
In 2.5 months.
In 2.5 months.
Gotcha.
It was always some excuse, something, this and other. And so then around this time, I started kind of, questioning what was going on, because I started going, well, if he hasn't paid me yet, has he paid anyone? So I decided to start kind of digging around, but there was only so much I could really do, at least at the time. But I started kind of digging around, and I hadn't seen any complaints of payment or anything from people who had worked with him. So there was no like public outcry. There was no rage or anything like that. So I hadn't seen anything like that. So I calmly went to Ryan and I said, hey man, we've been at this for, I was wondering when we're going to handle, payment for stuff and this, that, and other. And he flips out on me. Like literally flips out on me, which was baffling. I'm just like, what? And then, apparently I was selfish because I was asking for my money. Mm-hmm. I guess that is selfish because I want my money, and all kinds of other stuff. So at this point, I was just like, well, all right. I didn't want my work to go to waste,
I'm curious. Did he try to say like, well, look, these other people, did he mention that other people weren't being paid yet and they were just all were like in the faith of the game, and you know, they'd get paid eventually because this game, there's no way for this game to go other than up. It's going to succeed no matter what. Is that kind of his mentality?
That was basically the mentality and the stance that he took.
Okay.
But at this point,
did he admit at that point that there were artists who hadn't been paid yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
He hadn't admitted that. He said that he was behind on payments, and he would essentially get to me as soon as he could because he was behind on payments to Andrew, which Andrew verified, and with his programmer, whose name escapes me at the moment, but he was behind with him.
Yeah, I think he went by Evil Dog. Is that right?
Yeah, that was it. Evil Dog. Yeah. So because of that, and I even talked to Evil Dog, and Evil Dog again confirmed that Ryan was behind. He just didn't say how behind he was.
Okay.
So, but anyway, moving forward, we get to a point where I ended up wanting to have a conversation with him and one of the investors, because they were asking like certain design things, certain questions, this and other. And well, he didn't design anything. So the next best thing would be to have the person who designed it be there. So I was in the meeting with them, and that meeting went really well. They were very interested in stuff and this and that. And the call ended, but it ended in a couple of days later, I get I didn't even get a Skype message. I got an email from Ryan saying that they needed a prototype. And I was like, okay, get your programmer to make a prototype. Like, I don't know why this involves me, you know? I was like, well, get your programmer to make a prototype of the new game. Just kind of, you know, you could fudge it a little bit. You don't have to have the exact rights, but you can, because I didn't do that. When I made my prototypes, I didn't do that. I took already existent stuff and just kind of built the system, and then just had the sprites kind of act in the way that they would be in the system. Because it didn't make a lot of sense to spend a ton of money on sprites for this, and then I'm going to have to end up getting them changed, and it costs me more money, right? So I mean, that just kind of makes sense to me. So I just kind of used old stuff, you know, just kind of like old games that, you know, you could go a Mugen and get stuff for, you know.
So to clarify, though, there was a game that existed, or an engine that existed, and it wasn't. It didn't resemble your new redesign at all. But there was an engine that existed, but for whatever reason, he couldn't get his programmer to actually make the changes in there. So you ended up having to make an entirely from the ground up, like
from scratch.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did he? And he approached you to do that? He just said, like, what was his excuse?
Initially, he said that he needed a prototype. I went, okay, get your programmer to do it. But Evil Dog had essentially, quote unquote, bowed out, and so I immediately was like, well, why did he leave? And Evil Dog even said this, but come to find out, he was just like, I don't want to deal with it. So, but he said that he had some personal family stuff that he had to deal with at that time, and that he had to step away from the game. So I was like, okay, well, if that's the case, then maybe you should look into finding another programmer. And then he hits me with the bomb that the company wants the prototype done in 2 weeks. Or they want it in 2 weeks, which is retarded. Like, I'm like, what? Like, what company would ask for that? It was maddening. I was just like, how do you expect that to work? You know?
So why didn't he just give you, for instance, the like source code for the
source code?
Yeah.
I have to this day no answer to that. Okay. I asked for it. I said, hey, could you just give me the source code and I'll just work from that? I could have saved a lot of trouble.
Yep.
But no, I asked for it. He didn't give it.
Do you think that maybe behind the scenes, Evil Dog didn't want to give Ryan the source code because he was like maybe holding it for like, hey, you haven't paid me in a long time. If you want the source code, maybe you should pay me the way you were supposed to. I don't know. That's just maybe a guess as to why.
Well, no, it's a pretty good guess because that's exactly what he.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what he did. But I that was only after I talked to him later.
Okay.
So I learned that he did. But he did actually do that. He did not give Ryan the source code, which was actually really smart on his part because it protected him. Protected Evil Dog.
And unfortunately, the artists don't have the same kind of leverage. But I guess we'll get into that later. So, okay, yeah, you had to make a prototype from scratch. You used sprites from older games like King of Fighters or something.
King of Fighters, CVS2,
Yeah, and just made a prototype from scratch for this new investor. And Ryan basically, essentially, just made you the designer make this whole entire prototype in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, during that time, I mean, you were around during that. So
yeah, yeah. To clarify, what happened was that Ryan contacted me because I guess he needed another programmer, and he was like, "Oh, Pocket Rumble's a game that is a fighting game that has online multiplayer. Why don't we just hire this guy?" And luckily, I didn't get too involved. I mean, Ryan talked to me a lot. I ended up talking to you a bit. But ultimately, I learned to not get involved through, someone way smarter than me, Mike Z, who was more in the industry at that point than I was. Basically, I kind of broke down a bit what was going on. And Mike Z was like, don't do that. Whatever you're doing, just stop. Just stop doing that. And I took his advice and I stayed away from it. And then, okay, later on, there's some stuff that happens that I'm glad I didn't get involved and have my name associated with it. But anyway, so that I was there and I was talking to you at this point. So you make this prototype and I played it and it was pretty good for 2 weeks. I can't believe you got as much done as you did. But so continue. You made this prototype.
Yeah, I made the prototype. I was actually rather proud that it, but I was dead afterwards because I did not sleep. And if I did, it was like hour or two, and then I'm back on it because the grind, man. The grind of sitting there, just okay, this goes here. All right, I need this sprite. I mean, because it wasn't just the coding. I had to do the sprites and this and other in 2 weeks. It was madness. But we I did it and sent it to the investor. And then I find out that the investor never said 2 weeks. They just said, get us one as quickly as you can. They never said 2 weeks. I lost my mind. Okay. I was so angry because I worked so hard on that. And I didn't sleep. I didn't nothing during that time. And all I did was that prototype. I ate and dreamt that prototype when I did sleep. And I get up, back to the prototype, go to the bathroom. What can I do in the prototype? It's just all these things. I was like, hey, and to make it worse, this actually also happened to fall in around the time I was supposed to have eye surgery. And Ryan playing the role manages to essentially convince me to work on a prototype and reschedule my eye surgery, which really just my fault. I can't really blame him for that. But I was supposed to have eye surgery at that time, and I ended up kind of paying the price for that. But that's again my fault. I don't hold him responsible for that. But I should have just said no. I should have just been, no, I'm done with this, whatever. However, after that prototype, I was done.
I have a question before we continue. What, at that point, was it just how much time you already invested in the design that kind of put you over the edge to be like, okay, agreeing to the prototype?
Yeah, I was of the mind that I wanted to see this recreation come to fruition. And I kind of kept in the back of my mind, successful Kickstarter, people believe in the project, this and the other. I kept that in the back of my mind. And so I kept essentially holding on to that because I believed that that there was something really there, because the people who were looking at the game, I mean, Maximilian was promoting the game.
Yeah. SRK was writing articles about it, right? Almost every update that existed.
Like they were doing like SRK was doing, Maximilian, like other big, what was it? Red Raptor, some big YouTuber was, the big YouTubers were in it and they were like promoting it and this, that, and other. So I'm just like,
and you as a designer, know how difficult it is to get YouTubers or SRK to write an article about you as an indie fighting game, because at the time there were a lot of indie fighting games trying desperately to get on there, and Beast Fury made it. So to you, I would assume that would show like guaranteed success almost.
Yeah, it was because Monster managed to do it, and I was just kind of like, in the back of my mind, I was like, I just don't want my effort to go to waste.
Yeah,
and
it seemed like history was repeating itself, right? Because this seemed like a lot like Monster, where you came in basically, being like, hey, this game kind of sucks, here's some feedback. And then, that kind of rolls you up into the whole design work and becoming a part of the project.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was really, really, and again, I can't blame Ryan for this. This was all my, I just couldn't let go of the idea that I just couldn't do that.
You cut out what you couldn't?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said that I couldn't let go of the idea that my work would go to waste.
Okay. Got it.
So the prototype was finished. I sent it to the company, not him. I sent it to them because I wanted to make sure they got it because of how much I worked on it, and they knew who I was because they had already talked email. So they knew who I was and whatnot. So it wasn't like just some random dude sitting on a prototype. What the hell is it? And then afterwards, they played the prototype and they were like, "This is actually fantastic," And I was like, "Awesome, great, perfect." Yeah, I was like, "Great, I'm glad you guys love it." And that kind of gave me like a validation, gave me validation. And it was after that I learned that they didn't actually need it in 2 weeks. They were surprised that I even did it in 2 weeks. And I was like, "You have got to be kidding me." And they were like, "Is there a reason that you believe that we needed it in 2 weeks?" And I was like, "Well," and so I said, "Well, Ryan told me that you guys said that you wanted it in 2 weeks." And they were like, "No, that's not what we didn't. Maybe there's a miscommunication." And I was like, "That's a pretty big miscommunication, but all right, fine. All right." So I said, "Okay, whatever." So I, around this time, you had already kind of been like, I talked to Mike Z, we're done. We're not going here. But me and you still communicated. But, he was like, you were like, "No." And then funny thing is, shortly thereafter, I talked to Mike Z. Because Mike Z was actually a fan of Monster. And I actually knew him from back in IRC days when we organized playing game stuff in the IRC channel. He was actually one of the people who was really big on Monster. And he really, 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 really did it. And he would always, whether you asked him or not, he gave you his feedback. And but I appreciated it. It was great. So my rapport with Mike Z had always been nothing but amicable. And I had heard that Mike Z had actually offered to help Ryan at some point with because of the Z engine. Because the idea was that it would use the Z engine to essentially develop Beast Fury.
At this point, was that kind of unprecedented? Was them fighting herds kind of like, was that?
That wasn't really a thing yet.
Okay.
That wasn't, so it wasn't a thing yet. At least as far as I was aware of. At the time, Beast Fury would have been the first game to, it would have been the first.
Okay.
Would have been the first. So, but because of that, because of Mike Z's dealings with Ryan, which were obviously positive, he said, "No way, I'm not working with this guy." And flags. I had like a 2-3 hour conversation with him about it. We talked almost ad nauseum about this whole thing and his experience with it, and how Ryan was like bashing people who were giving criticism and kind of bashing him and stuff like that. So he thought it was a little rich, or Mike Z thought it was a little rich that all of a sudden now Ryan wants to,
Yeah.
He thought it was very rich. And Mike Z was even willing to just kind of let it go if Ryan was willing to make a public apology for his behavior.
Okay.
So he was actually willing to. Now, I don't think he would have let him have the Z engine, but I think Mike Z would have at least been willing to give his feedback and advice and help, and even maybe help provide some sort of resources.
Okay.
But that never happened.
I wasn't really aware of any of this stuff.
You're learning some new stuff.
Yeah, the email chain that I was with Mike Z basically just said that, he thought Ryan was really shady. He gave me some examples, but I don't remember if he mentioned ever actually like talking to him one-on-one. Interesting.
Actually, there's so on the Skullheart forums, there is actually, you can see a lot of the discussion between Mike Z and Ryan on their forums. In regards to Beast Fury. So, if you have time, you can always go in there and check it out. There's a lot of it on there, and they had actual discussion prior, like personal, private discussion. But you can see a lot of the discussion between them on there, and Ryan's reactions to things, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's still up. It's still there.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can definitely see a lot of that, and it'll probably what happened. But yeah, after talking with Mike Z extensively, fun for him. But like after talking with extensively, I had also made my decision to bid adieu. That was just like, I'm not dealing with this because I'd wasted at this time maybe 5 or 6 months of time on never being paid and on. Actually, it was a little bit more than that, maybe like 6 or 7. But I spent all this time on that. I'd made a prototype within an unreasonable amount of time. And I designed a game from the ground, designed every character from the ground up, designed everything essentially from the ground up, and I had not seen any type of reward or compensation for that. And some people may say that I got like the biggest shit into the stick on that, but the fact of the matter is I'm not the person that got the worst of it. And this is actually kind of something else I go into, but Ryan was a very smooth talker. He was very good at shining a turd, and he was very good at selling people his dream. The problem is that it's kind of like, you see a car and then you buy it sight unseen. You go buy the car, it's just there. Car's there. No engine, no tires. It's just a shot.
I got you.
Yeah, it's just it's basically that.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't know why you would ever buy a car sight unseen, but you know what I
Uh-huh.
mean. So that's basically what happened there. Now, the stuff that happened after it, that's where things get really bad.
Oh,
And I
so
mean, really bad.
exploiting someone to making a prototype in 2 weeks where they didn't even need to, and not paying them for months of design work beforehand, isn't the bad part.
Compared to what I'm about to say,
Okay.
that was the pleasant part.
Okay.
Compared to what I'm about to say, that was the... So after I decided to bow out, Andrew had decided to stick with the project, and he had asked me if it was okay if he could use my design, and I said absolutely not.
Uh-huh.
I was like, since Ryan did not give me or sign my contract, he does not actually own the rights to any of this information,
Uh-huh.
so he can't use it.
Okay.
And there kind of became like a battle between that and between him and myself
Mhm.
over that, because he was like, well, it's my characters. See, the thing is that all of this is text, and because you did not sign a contract, there is nothing that says that this is intellectually your property.
Mhm.
So if you want to fight over it, I'm willing to fight, but I don't think that's a fight you want. So you can stick with your original concept,
Mhm.
because this and other. Around this time, this is when I learned kept the source code.
Oh,
So
you're
that's...
cutting it in and out a little bit. Can you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if it's
Um,
the mic sensitivity or what, but
my bad. It might just be internet or something. But
okay.
what I said was that this is around the time, like after I had decided to bow out, that I found out that Evil Dog had kept the source code.
Mhm.
And why Ryan needed a redesign, because he did not have the source code to the game.
Right.
And I'm like, well, you're gonna have to talk to Evil Dog, you know. Uh, and I think around this time, it was just a little bit before this time. He had asked you to write. This is before you bowed out. He had
Mhm.
asked you to write a GDD.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, yeah, and for what reason I don't know, but he had asked you to write a GDD and that he would pay you for that, and I think you charged him. I don't remember the amount, but um, he it took forever for him to pay that. And I mean, your work on it was rather minimal anyway,
Yeah, it
but
was super minimal because I was completely busy with. It was really weird for him to be asking that of me in the first place, but
right.
it was just at a certain point where I think Pocket Rumble wasn't really making any money at that point, so I was just taking side jobs anywhere I could. Yeah,
Mhm.
but anyway, yeah, I did some pretty minimal work on the GDD, and I didn't because of the minimal work on it, I didn't charge that much compared to like what it should be.
Right,
And
exactly.
you went in and like redesigned the whole thing effectively, right? I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh boy! And then he didn't pay you for that, of course.
No, of
Oh
course. I
god!
mean, because getting paid for your work is ridiculous. You know,
And I think the only reason he paid me was probably because he wanted to show good faith for me to
and
give
that's
him.
why.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
exactly. That's
So
why
he doesn't pay anybody else, but he pays me for like the minimal work that I did on that thing, just because he wants me to eventually, program the whole entire game for him. Eventually, use my engine
Mhm.
to reprogram Beast Fury from the ground. Well, not reprogram, but make the new version of Beast Fury from the ground up.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So after that,
Uh huh.
I was pretty much fed up. I was like, okay, you know what, man, I'm done. I don't want to talk to you, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I then, sometime after this, get contacted by someone over at Fur Affinity, one of their more renowned, as like a big furry site or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I get contacted by them, and they want to do. I believe the guy's name was Rockaway Carter.
Okay.
He wanted to do an interview with me on the whole situation, because I was actually very public about what I thought in terms of the project, and I thought that people were getting scammed and they were getting screwed, because they were, because no one was getting paid. The the worst part of this is Rockaway Carter. He wanted to do the interview because he was also a former artist on the game.
I see.
Yeah. And he was like, he knew of me through Monster. Like basically on Fur Affinity, Monster was like a legacy thing. I don't know why, but it was. Okay. So a lot of people on there knew me because of that. It was basically a furry fighting game. So naturally, Fur Affinity, furries, fighting game, jam it all together. There you go. To them, it was like the Holy Grail or something. So they were, fans of the work, and they were surprised to hear that I was even a part of Beast Fury because it wasn't public knowledge. It was just kind of something I wasn't going around saying, "Hey, I'm Beast Fury." I wasn't doing that because any project that I worked on, I wasn't really like that. I was just, okay, I work on this project, I'm done, move on.
Yeah, I mean, you're working on a couple projects right now that you're not mentioning, right? Too?
Right.
Yeah, that's just what you do.
I am.
You just don't you don't bring it public until it's out. It seems like.
Yeah, and exactly. That's how I roll. I don't, because the way I work is I never want to say I'm doing something without being able to do it. Okay. So like, hey, I'm working on this. Stay tuned. But I have like no proof of anything. You
don't want to be Ryan, effectively.
Exactly. And I don't want to. I always pride myself on being transparent. And I'd rather say nothing than to say something wrong or that's false. Okay. So I'd rather omit stating I'm working on something than to say that I'm working on something, no kind of backing up to it whatsoever. Okay. So moving on from that point, Rockaway Carter and at least 10 other people were artists that had worked on Beast Fury. Rockaway Carter was actually one of the people who did some of the promo art, while a couple of the other people were working on the animations. I actually talked to, I think their name, the person who was in charge of it was named Lonnie or something. They were the person who was like the head of the animation stuff. Okay. And they had actually designed the sprites for Beast Fury. And I, after like really sitting down and talking with him, and they were kind of explaining to me like how much work they did. And once the Kickstarter got funded, they had gotten like a single payment, and it wasn't even nearly what they should have gotten. They got a single payment, and then like all their work after that just never got paid for. And the payment they got, I think they said was like $5,000 or something, which, and it wasn't all of them that got paid. It was like, I know Lilani was one of them. And then there was like two others that said they got, and Lilani, because Lilani was the head of it, got paid the most, and it paid like $1,500 or something. And but from that point, I mean, that's nothing when it comes to, that's literally nothing. It's like saying
for how much? So yeah, they got paid how much for how many months of animation work?
They were working on the game since 2013.
2013?
Yeah,
okay.
They were working on it from the beginning.
Okay.
And it ended up being something like I said, $5,000 for Lilani, and then for the other two, they ended up, $1,400-$1,500. And the Kickstarter was done in 2015, so they didn't get paid anything until 2 years later. Which I guess when you're looking at like the scope of it, you're like, okay. But then if you do it Indiegogo, you get what I mean? So it's like, again, it comes back to the question I asked earlier: where did the Indiegogo money go? Because nothing with that had ever, clarified, or nothing with that had ever gotten, what was it? None of the rewards had been given out, or whatever the case. Like people were still waiting on arcade sticks that they were supposed to get. Right. I was just, they were like wooden arcade sticks that it was supposed to be releasing with the game, and nobody got it, which was ridiculous. You're like, why would you promise people this? This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, wooden arcade stick. I wonder if he even did he like mention who was going to make that or anything? That sounds like a difficult. You just promised that it's going to be quite difficult to make.
So he had one arcade stick that he had himself.
Oh, okay.
And that was it. He did show it. It was shown on the for Beast Fury. So he did. There was one in existence. Okay. But no one else who had ever did any of the pledging had gotten that.
Right.
You know. And it was unfortunate, but that's basically what it was. None of those pledges got that stuff.
Well, I mean, the important thing is that none of these, I mean, at this point, there's no cancellation or anything mentioned, right? This is just the game's in development for everybody, you know, they think it's in development and then there's no evidence to say that it is or not.
Right, which is why I didn't say anything. Again, why there would be no point for me to say something. Again, there's going on.
Yeah.
So I didn't go, I'm working on Beast Fury, you know, because at that point it'd been like, whoa, I just ruined myself here.
Yeah.
But at the time, again, I didn't look at it. It was just, okay, this was a colossal waste of time. I'm just going to work on something else. And that's basically what I did.
Did Ryan ever say he was going to ever pay you after you bowed out?
Yes.
Or? Oh, okay.
So he did. He contacted me. He said, hey, can we talk? And I was like, there's nothing to talk about. Because I had, you know, blocked him on Skype and blocked him on Facebook and this and other. And he was harassing me through. I was just, what? You know, like, what do you want? He went as far as making a new Skype account just so that he could talk to me. And I was just, what? And he's like, well, I don't want my game to die. That was his statement. Yeah, like, I don't want my game to die. And I was like, and what, you think I'm going to save it? Like, do I look like a savior to you? Like, I was like, dude, if the game dies, it's your fault. Like, period. Like, you did this to yourself. Like, you screwed over people. You did not keep your word or anything like that. And what he was trying to prevent, because he had, even though
you cut out again. What was he trying to prevent?
He was trying to prevent the interview, or for me allowing Rockaway Carter to put up the interview that I did.
I see. So he got wind of this somehow.
Yeah, I don't know who told him, but he had found out. I think Andrew did, but I don't know. But either way, he did get wind of the interview, and that was happening anyway. I didn't care. I was just like, the only way that I wouldn't is if somehow he decided that he was going to pay me all the money he owed. Which he was like, oh, I'm going to pay it. I'm going to pay it. This and other. I was just like, why do I not believe you? And you know, she's like, why do I not believe you? Oh, man,
yeah. So even when he was put in a corner, he wouldn't pay you, even though you were basically giving an ultimatum. If you don't pay me, I'm not going to work on it anymore. Like, clearly, I already put so much work with the prototype and everything else. Like, pay me now, and maybe I'll even work on your game, because you're already
no. I would have
definitely done it?
I would have not have worked on that game any further, because I would not have wanted to work with him.
I see. Well then, okay, so then he probably, just because this is the way he is with exploiting people, he just didn't see you ever being, you were not a loose end, you were just done, so he wasn't going to pay you because he couldn't get anything more out of you, I guess.
Right. So I do the interview, or rather the interview goes up. And right after it, almost right after it, he does his own interview. Both of which you can find on Furfin. But he does his own interview, and without mentioning me by name, he refutes all of my, of course, in which doesn't matter because I had all the artists behind me on that. They were all like, you didn't pay us for this, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So when you talk about that $5,000, just going back to that for a bit, that $5,000 went to everyone collectively.
No, that went to the one person, and then the To the other two, it was only like 1,500.
And okay, so the main artist was the one doing all of the sprite work or promotional art, or what was it?
The sprite work.
Okay, gotcha.
The sprite work.
So everyone doing anything that wasn't sprite work was basically paid 1,500 for, like, I mean, if it was, they started their work in 2013, then
2013.
At this point, what year was it?
When this happened, this was like early 2016.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh.
Yeah.
That's wow.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay.
It is ridiculous.
Uh-huh.
But if anyone got the real shit into the stick, it was the art. Because art is the most difficult thing of any project.
Mm-hmm.
Like getting it visually the way you want it to look, making sure the aesthetic is there, making sure that that you have the sprites the way you want them. Because if you're doing sprite, like, it's one thing if like 3D models are easier to work with, I guess, in the long run. But spriting, if you mess up sprite, you got to redo it. You got to.
Yep.
You don't just go, let me erase one line. Like, no, you're gonna.
Yeah. There, if one thing is messed up, if it's like a flawed idea for a move, have fun doing 40 new frames of animation in a 2D fighting game, especially. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And each of the characters in Beast Fury were sitting at some absurd amount of frames. Like, what was it? Like 1,000 frames per character, which is absurd. Like, no indie game should be that. KOF 13 was beautiful, and it was only 600 per character.
Yeah.
So why does Beast Fury have that? It was so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was so ridiculous. And again, KOF 13 was one of the most beautiful I saw. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That game was incredible to look at. So why does this game need that many? Is beyond.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, he tells you that he's not going to pay you, and you're done with him. He contacted you again because he wanted the game to survive, but you were just like, no way, I'm not doing that. Yeah,
I'm done with it.
So
what he then offers is to buy buy my design from me, and so I went. If you were reputable, I would agree to it. If you were reputable, I wouldn't have a problem with it because I don't want to look at this game. But he's not. He wasn't reputable at all. So I was like, no. I was like, I want the money first.
Yep.
Obviously, you got to pay up. You lost whatever license you had for anything else. So guess what? There is no trust here. You need to pay up first. And I don't want half a deposit. I want all of it. Which of course he was like, well, I think that's unfair. Yeah, sure. Genius. But then after that was the last.
Last what?
That was the last time I spoke to him directly. I had not. After that, I blocked him. He tried to add me again. I just ignored it. I would not put myself through that anymore. And then we come to find out that a lot of people who were working on that project came forward and were, yeah, this is what happened with him. He would curse me out if I did one thing wrong, messed up a line or something like that, or he would just tell me my work was garbage, or he would not pay us because he said he wouldn't pay us because it wasn't to the standard that it should be, or some dumb nonsense.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I felt so bad for these people because these people, and most of these guys are artists. They all worked so hard. And the thing is, the game graphically looked great, especially for an indie game. Like, what? These guys really put in a lot of work, time of their life to make this game look like a real product that's comparable to any project that was not indie, and he took it and he threw it into the ground. If I had half of his resources, half of them, I would have made a killer game. And if I had half of them,
yeah,
I mean, hell, a quarter of them, All right. Like it just boggled my mind that someone could be this freaking stupid. Like, I thought I had known some stupid people in my life, but Ryhan Stevens is the epitome of what I will ever consider to be stupid.
Okay, gotcha. I mean, yeah, it makes sense. Well, I mean, here's the thing, though. He was able. He was a smooth enough talker to kind of get this many people working for him with either minimal pay or, in your case, literally no pay. So I guess what a thing would be good to know is like, how do you see that? How come? What are the red flags? You mentioned some of the red flags there, but in his language, do you remember anything that he said that specifically, like, kind of fosters this kind of toxic, exploitative kind of attitude?
Yeah, actually, and before I actually answer that, there's one mention about the same thing, but so just for anybody who decides that they want to work on a project or whatever, and this is just a general rule of thumb, if a person and you need to protect yourself, that is your number one rule of doing anything, whether it be online, especially online, because it's real easy to get wrecked online, but you have to protect yourself. Good ways to protect yourselves is don't do any work without a contract. Another way of protecting yourself is getting half of the payment that you would get paid up front. And
I agree with that second one, but the first one, even the contract, here's the problem. If you're an indie developer with no money, I mean, are you really going to be able to take it to court? Because you'll need to get lawyers and pay for lawyers and things like that, and months and months of work.
I suppose that is true. But the thing is it worse or better than just taking someone as,
Yeah, it's good to have it. It's just even when
it's one of those things that can get kind of messy, and yeah, you do have the court issue to worry about and whatnot. But I think that's more of a worry for people who are just solely doing development than it is for someone who may be getting into development. Like for instance, they have a job and they work on stuff, they're doing development as a hobby, and they get pulled into a project that they think is really good. They should still have a contract. And the thing is that there is no, but there's, I think the second one is a little bit more important first, because there is no more binding contract than someone actually giving you the money.
Yeah.
And that's the case really in any type of business, is there is no more of a commitment to getting something done than if someone gives you the money.
Right. So in fact, it should be more like milestones, right? Where you get a big money up front, and then as soon as you're showed to work on the game and doing some progress on it, you get another payment, and then another one in between that, and then the final payment, which is another big lump sum like the first one.
Right.
Kind of not get yourself in a position where you're losing out on money for doing a lot of work.
Right. It's always best, in my opinion, to, I would say, compartmentalize your work. You put your work into like boxes, and you know what you're going to be doing, and then you say, hey, I'm going to do this amount of work, and then when that is done, then you get paid for that, and then whatnot. But you don't do any of that without a down payment of some type.
Right.
And make sure that the down payment is real and substantial. Like, make sure that is like, again, you got to protect yourselves. Like, if you're getting paid through PayPal and whatnot, don't put yourself in a position where someone could charge or stuff like that. Like, protect yourself. Move the money to somewhere else once you get it, so that doesn't happen. Like, just what I'm saying? Like, just stuff like that, because there are people out there who will do this. They'll pay you, and then they'll be like, oh, well, I forgot to pay my electric bill. And they'll charge it back or whatever. And there's some scumbags out there. So just make sure to protect yourself.
Yeah. Do you think Ryhan is more of the exception or the rule of indie developers who make a lot of money on Kickstarter or something, and then just hire people at random, basically anyone they can find online who they can kind of get to help them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that he's like
Well, I
rare?
think no, he's not rare. He's one of the worst seen, but he's not rare. There are people who are actually, surprisingly enough, worse than him. But I won't go into that. But the thing is, he's a real case. And I mentioned earlier that him getting funded was actually the worst case scenario. The reason I said that, and for getting funded twice, was the worst case scenario, because it was that created a belief and a trust in the product because of it. So now he had validation, and that's what sold the scam. When someone has validation of it, it makes it infinitely more believable. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're like, oh, these guys did really well, and this, like, you're looking at, and I'm nowhere near those guys, and those guys are doing amazing. It gives a certain level of validation doing. So that's what makes it worse. It's one thing if he had nothing and he was selling that nonsense, it probably wouldn't have worked. You know what I'm saying? But the fact is, he did have something, and that's why it worked.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it was the worst case scenario.
Yeah. I mean, it's just he got so much ahead already, so he could convince more people to work for him, because he already had like an intro already ready to go for the game, and a prototype of some sort. Even if it was designed like literally the worst design ever, it's still, you've got sprites working in an engine with character designs that people seem to like a lot, and there's a lot of like sprite work. There's a ton of sprite work, so it looked like there was no way this wasn't like people were getting scammed. It's just like it wouldn't have gotten this far. It wouldn't have gotten this far being scammed. Yeah,
exactly. And then this kind of was like one of the more tragic parts of the whole story. So there was a girl who was actually a really huge supporter of Beast Fury. Her name was Melody Stevens. She was actually one of the biggest backers. She was one of the few biggest backers of the game on Kickstarter. And she did it because she just was a huge fan of the product. And she was actually a terminally ill person. She, without going too much into her business, I'll just leave it there. She was terminally ill. And the idea of Beast Fury was she had spent a lot of time supporting and helping with. She would just do stuff of her own time to kind of help on her own end. And this, she only did this after I left. So before Beast Fury decided to take its nosedive into being canceled, she, Ryhan made everyone seem like the devil to her. And so she, who was a huge supporter of the product, decided that she got manipulated by him just like, everyone else. So I happened to find out about her, and I reached out to her to try to warn her about what was going on. She was not hearing any of it because I was the bad guy and this, that, and other. We were making lies up about him and stuff like that. She was not trying to hear any of it. Sure. And I didn't know that she was terminally ill. I actually found that much later, but and that actually does play a role in this. But she was very, as I said, she was very into the product, and she had done something. I don't remember exactly what she did. She had done something where, oh, I remember. He had asked her to lie, okay, and say that she had gotten one of the arcade sticks from the Kickstarter. And he then went and said, I'm sending you mine, my personal one. That, yeah.
Okay.
You can now see where this is going. So he said to her that I'm sending you mine. I'm going to send you my personal because it's taken longer than we expected, and you've been very blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And she ate it up because she was a fan, and she didn't want to believe that, someone could deceive her in such a manner. And I, once again, tried to reach out to her and say, look, he's BSing you. He's lying to you. All these people are not lying about him. They're telling the truth. And she had known of Monster, but didn't know that I was behind it. And I was like, look, I have worked on projects before. And she's like, yeah, what projects have you worked on? I worked on Monster. Here you go. And she's like, wait, you worked on Monster? I was like, yes, I'm the designer. And she's like, and you were working on Beast Fear? I said, yes. And I showed her like all the stuff that I was talking about and stuff like that. And she started becoming, more skeptical of him because she's like, oh, wait, if you're the guy who's behind Monster, like people say nothing but good stuff about you. So like, it's kind of, I can't imagine that, that was the case. I was like, why would people have a reason? That's the question you have to ask. So some time passed, and I hadn't talked to her for a while, but some time had passed, and she still hadn't received the arcade stick, obviously. And she was very upset about it. And Ryan had stopped responding to all of her messages. He had stopped responding to her on Facebook, stopped responding to her on Skype, stopped responding to her everywhere. Even after she had made that bogus thing about having the arcade stick, because she wanted to try and help him out, try and get his name cleared or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she was a very avid believer in him, and that kind of didn't go so well. And then once she realized that she was never getting stuff, she ended up, she was not in a good way. She ended up in the hospital for a month, just ill beyond belief. Yeah. And, it's like, that's the type of effect that this can have on people who are fans, and people who believe in a product, people who are willing to put their money that, and in her case, like she's a terminally ill person. And she works from home because she can't walk. And, he managed, and he again took advantage of that type of person. And that to me was sickening. I couldn't tolerate that. Because if you're working with people, you don't know their, or if you're talking with fans, you don't know their stories. You know that you're coming together off of a common thing, that they like something that you're doing.
Yeah.
Or that you both like something that each other is doing, or whatever the case is, or that there's something that nobody's doing. Oh, yeah, I like this anime, whatever. You guys get together. You don't know their stories unless you really talk with them. And this and the other, which is another topic in and of itself, but you don't know that. So when, these people are getting taken advantage of, it's not always just people who, just have money sitting around. It could be someone who's terminally ill. It could be someone that has, some kind of disability or whatever.
But Ryan knew that, right? Ryan knew the story, and he still did it anyway, right?
Yeah, he knew. Yeah, he certainly knew. He knew for sure.
And she was one of the big backers, I assume?
Yeah, she was one of the big backers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like you don't know this stuff. And that's not an excuse. Believe me, I'm not excusing it. I'm saying that because you don't know this stuff, this is why you have to be really careful with what you put out. And this is exactly, again, why I follow the philosophy of I don't say anything unless I have something to show. Right. Because the last thing that I want to do is get someone's expectations or their hopes up, and then I don't deliver. Mm-hmm. And that is something that holds very true to myself. I can understand like some other people may do that. And that's nothing. I have nothing against that, of course. Mm-hmm. But I myself, I don't do that for that reason. And I felt so bad for her that had happened because I mean, think about that. Like someone was such a huge fan of your thing, you essentially ripped their heart out of their chest and they put so much of themselves into believing in you, and you just go about your business. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Here's the thing that makes Ryan dangerous. Do you believe that he wanted to make a good game? Do you think that
I believe
that even through all this exploitation, that he still believed that the game would come out and be good, and he wanted to make a good game? It wasn't necessarily all about the money.
I want to believe, okay. I'm not going to.
My impression of Ryan was that he exploited people, and was being really weird with the money that the game earned, but he did believe in the game. I think he wanted to make a good game with these characters and like make something that the world would respect in some way. He was still actually an artist in some way. Do you not agree with that?
I agree with that.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so scary when he can so easily exploit people, because he's still, it's not like he's in it exactly. He wants to make the game any way possible, and he'll exploit people to do it. But the problem is that you can still kind of see some kind of drive to make something, not just make money. And that's what makes it really dangerous, is that I think people see that, even if through all his BS, you can still kind of see that he really wants to make a game. And you kind of, it makes it harder to say no, even when you're being exploited. I don't know. That's kind of the impression I got with a lot of people on this project.
I believe at some point he did want to make a good game.
Yeah.
And I think that somewhere along the road, and I can't say, but I think somewhere along the line, it became less about the game and more about himself. Because it was, it was me, I put this, I made this is blah, blah, blah.
Right.
When the reality of that is no person who any project does it on their own. And obviously, you've made Pocket Rumble, you and your cousin and this time you guys made Pocket Rumble, but you yourself didn't do all.
If you go into the credits, you'll see exactly how many people were involved. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of people.
Yeah. Even though me and Ash, the two main developers, we're the main idea behind the original concept, it took many, many, many people to actually get it to where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you yourself, you understand. That's something that he never did. Sure. And that, I think, also makes him dangerous, because if you have someone who is convincing enough to have a belief like this, a belief that they could make a good game, a game that is respected, a game that is a very, very solid product that could be expanded on and become a career. If you have someone who believes that, and they kind of get lost in their own head, it makes it dangerous, because they bring everyone else with them. And everyone who gets dragged down usually ends up worse because of it. The fortunate thing, and I do want to say this though, not everything about the project is a complete bust. I know we focused a lot on negatives, but there were some positives. I got to meet Christian, for instance. That's the positive. But some of the other positives are that if it wasn't for that game, or that among other things, but if it wasn't for the things that happened with Beast Fury, I wouldn't have actually decided to start developing games again. I had actually all but given up on it. And so if it wasn't for that, it was more so the fact that I was angry that Beast Fury went the route that it did, that I decided to get back into development, because I feel like I had to wash that stain off of my soul. You know, and since that time, I have worked on several different projects, and all of which were, pretty good. And I'm glad for that. The one I'm working is kind of like the crown jewel of that. So I do give Beast Fury some credit for essentially igniting that designer spark in me again, I guess. But because I literally had no intention of coming back to game design after losing my eyesight. So I had no intention of that. But I did. And I'm glad I did for a lot of reasons. So just because something negative happened, that was obviously negative, but just because something negative happens doesn't mean that some kind of positive comes out of it. Right. There is something that you can learn and that you can grow from, in that. And that type of experience wisened me up to a lot of these people, because my first experience in doing indie development was a good one. Working with Show and the other people that I worked with on Monster was a great experience. So the fact that it could go badly hadn't even occurred to me, which honestly was naive. It was very naive. And I don't even consider myself to be a naive person, but I was very naive about that. And I did wisen up. Mike Z was certainly a huge help in that, as he was for you as well. Yeah. But he was a huge help in, kind of severing myself from that. Sometimes you got to just take your loss. And that's what I had to do.
Yeah. So to sum it all up, basically, is, put safety nets so that you can't get exploited or can't get exploited that hard. But if you do, don't think it's the end of the road and everything. You can get something out of it, even if it does happen. It's not the end of the road for you necessarily. You'll learn to not get exploited again, most likely. And you'll probably gain some kind of, knowledge, or, be angry enough to be like, I want to make something better. And, so it's not the end of the road for you if you end up getting exploited by someone like Ryan, because there are many out there, as you said, and I agree with that. I haven't worked enough with other developers to really know that. And but you as a designer have probably talked to many different teams, and,
I've worked with a lot of different teams. I personally have only dealt with one other, like Ryan. I've worked with dozens. I've only dealt with one other. And the moment I saw it, I didn't even wait around. And, I just like, oh, well, we're not repeating that.
Yeah.
So it's not, whoa, back up.
But
I remember this one.
Without Beast Fury, without that experience, you wouldn't have necessarily caught that. You wouldn't have been as skeptical. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's good to kind of share that message and, let developers know that this thing does happen. It's not completely imaginary. And, there are ways to kind of protect yourself from that. And even if you end up finding yourself in it, you should get out as soon as you can, and you can learn from it. And it's not necessarily the end of your development. Either a designer, an artist, a programmer, anything. You can find a way. You can find a way out. You shouldn't say, well, all I do is get exploited. I don't want to make games anymore. Like, this is all that this ever is. There are ways. There are other teams out there who won't do this. This is not everybody. Even if you found more than one Ryan in your life, there's going to be people out there who aren't like that. And you just keep yourself protected, find the right people, and you'll be able to make great things. That's what I think.
So one thing I'd like to mention is, it's going to sound weird, but you're never really going to know you're being exploited till it's pointed out to you. And that sounds like, well, you're just dumb then. No, it's ignorance, but it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's that a lot of the time when you're being exploited, it's done in such a manner that it's not obvious. And in the case with Ryan, it wasn't necessarily obvious. Again, he had a lot of credibility behind him. So those are the most dangerous ones, the ones that have credibility. You know, those are the most dangerous ones, and you have to look at and understand that, as Christian said, that you're not the only person that it will ever happen to, and it always helps to make sure to talk to other. You gotta find a dev group or something and just shoot the shit or whatever. Just talk to other devs, and then when you have questions or you think that something doesn't sound right, or if you aren't entirely sure about something, ask. Okay, like ask. Be like, hey, so this guy said this, and I don't know if it's legit or anything. Anybody know anything about that?
That's exactly That's exactly what I did with Mike Z, and then you talked to Mike Z as well. Having someone in the industry, especially someone who's a little bit more involved in the industry, to ask, is this normal? And if you don't have that, if you don't have a personal connection, me and you both could talk to Mike Z personally. We had a personal outlet. So if you don't have that, there are forums. You don't have to say specific names. So if you're worried about, oh, okay, I can't say this because I don't want to let people know that I'm doing it, you could do it anonymously on a game dev forum, anywhere, indie games or a popular game. Just try to make sure that you're not, if you even get the slight hint that maybe something's going on, you should investigate it. You should investigate it, and you should ask people.
Right. Yeah. Always do your due diligence before getting involved in it. Like, doesn't matter if they've got money. Don't let the money sing. Just put on some muffling headphones and don't listen to it. Just pay attention to the facts and stuff. Like, pay attention to that.
If they said they were going to pay you, and then they say, well, this wasn't actually up to snuff, so I'm not going to pay you for this one, or I'm going to delay your payment because I don't really trust that you're a good artist because this one came out a little rough, and I'll pay you for this one if you prove that you can do good art later. If you hear any of that, you need to immediately investigate. First of all, you shouldn't agree with that ever. But second, you should investigate to make sure that this project that you're working on isn't something like another Beast Fury.
Yeah. You do not want to put yourself in that could happen. And the thing is, it's not as uncommon as you think, but believe me, when I party of other groups and devs, they're not like this. But there are going to be people who, the whole wolf in sheep's clothing thing, there are going to be people like that. And Ryhan was one of them, he was one of them. And I will give him, credit to the point where I do believe at some point that he wanted to make a real and a good product, because you can't make the sprites and you can't build the way the game looked as a scam. You can't. It's just not possible. You don't do that. There was a time where he obviously had a patent as a product, and I think it simply got away from him. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know how to handle anything. So instead of learning that he would not, and that the more he would put it off, the more he thought it would go away. And that's not what happened. And that's actually kind of a lesson to new developers too, is if you feel as if you're being overwhelmed by the product or your thing, step away from it for a little bit. Don't just sit there and stare at it, step away for a minute or a week or so, and just kind of get your mind fresh, just chill, play some games, do something else. Okay. Don't even look at it, because it's when you sit there and you stare at the product that it will just seem like this massive. They're like, I'm never going to finish this game,
Yeah.
And it's when you sit there and just stare at it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of attitude that might get you into a position where you're the one exploiting people necessarily. If you feel trapped that you have made this game, or at least announced it too early, and now you're stuck making the game and you have no money, you might end up being the kind of person that says, I promise I will get you money when it's not. And you might even believe it. But I don't know if that's necessarily how you should. If you have other people that on your team and you're not paying them, I wonder. I'm not sure you should be conducting the game that way.
No,
even if you truly believe
think
that you're going to, give them all the money once the game comes out. There's so many things that could happen. The game might not come out. It's not really a particularly good way to work with a team.
It's always best whenever you're working on it with a team to be as transparent.
Yeah.
If you are, and I know it's hard. Like you're sitting there, you're looking at your project, you're like, man, we don't have enough money for this, and this, that, and other. It's better to just say so. It's better to just be like, hey, all right, this is the position we're in right now. Okay. Is there any way we can work around this? And that's that's why you have a team,
So transparency is the big takeaway here. Ryan was the complete opposite of transparent. Even if you end up in a position like Beast Fury was in, and you're a developer, you're the main lead here, and you have a programmer and an artist that you found yourself like not being able to pay properly anymore. Maybe you started paying them and then couldn't anymore. Just being transparent about it right away is the safest way to kind of not become, and put yourself in a corner where you end up becoming someone like Ryan.
Yeah, you don't want that. Yeah. You don't want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whew. Okay. Well, I think this was really, really productive. I think we learned a lot about, being exploited, and a little bit into like not becoming an exploiter yourself if you're an indie developer and you just, have a team. So is there anything you want to plug since you're here? You work on other things now, so if you want to
work on a lot of things now.
Yeah.
So if anyone plays any type of CCGs, they'll know me as a tour CCG event now. But I am currently working on my own card game. And because I have the world's most unnatural obsession with card games ever. But anyway, I'm working on my own card game. And we're finally in the dev phase of actually getting the game made for a client and all that. I mean, we're with a client and stuff. We're in that phase. We're in we're moving pretty steady. So the game's called Chronatus Card Fighting System. We're looking to kind of bring a lot of different types of game licenses and stuff like that into the game. But for right now, I have my own thing. And
can you spell that name? Because the way it's
Chronatus.
Like, go ahead.
Yeah. So just Chrono, which was CHRONO.
Yeah.
And then TIS, which is TIS.
Yeah.
So you just put them together.
Cool.
But yeah, I'm working on that. As far as it was just typed in your chat. But I play Chronatus Twitter for it, which currently doesn't have anything on it yet, which will change at the end of the month. But we've got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe for that. I've been working on it for a really long time, and I'm happy.
I'm aware of that. You've sent me so many prototypes, and you have revamped it many times. And I think every time you revamp it, it is a lot better. At least for what I like. I like things to be, the complexity comes from interaction of simple systems. And it seemed like with every prototype you were sending me, it was becoming more and more like that. So
now it's in such a great spot right now. Like during our playtest sessions, we have them every Tuesday and Thursday. I learned something new every time about the game. It's pretty sweet. And the way that when you see the level of play evolve in the game, it's actually really sweet to watch. So it's one of those like developers' pride things. You see people playing your game and enjoying it and stuff like that. Again, developers' pride. But it's right now it's in an excellent space. It is refined beyond measure, and it's to a point now where we've actually we have a client being developed and stuff. So we're pretty soon we'll be able to share like progress on that at the end of the month, and kind of we're going to be very transparent about everything regarding it.
Great.
We're going to be showing where the game started, what it looks like now, and then where it's going to end up and stuff. So we're going to like really carry the whole process. We're going to show everyone everything.
That's great. I mean, that's one of the best ways to avoid something like Kickstarter that never actually turns into anything. Being
Exactly.
super transparent, everyone, even if like it won't happen for you, but for other projects, if it ends up falling apart, like if you're transparent the entire time, everyone should understand. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, and no one should get extremely frustrated. I mean, they could be disappointed, but the frustration level would be minimal. So
I'd rather. It's a saying I love to say. I'd rather someone.
Oh, you cut out. You'd rather what?
Oh, I'd rather people be mad at me than for them to be mad at me for lying.
You cut out one more time.
Did I again?
Yeah.
I said that I would rather people be mad at me for telling them the truth.
Yes.
Than for them to be mad at me because I lied.
I think I remember you saying something almost exactly the same during all of Beast Fury's nonsense and being really frustrated because Ryan was basically the opposite of you and he was who you had to talk to. But
exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, everyone should go check it out, and it's on Twitter, and you have something to announce at the end of the month. You have a client, and it's coming out. So if you're into card games, it's much different than what is popular right now. I would say it's almost nothing like Hearthstone. It's nothing like Shadowverse. It's very much its own thing with a really unique mechanics. So I think everyone should check it out. Obviously, I'm biased. I've been seeing it for years grow. So and yeah, you're my friend. So I'm biased. Everyone should make their own conclusion. But I think it's pretty cool, and everyone should check it out. And thanks again for sharing the story. I know you kind of wanted to step away from it and not be, remember all this again. But I think it is a good cautionary tale for developers. So
I think people should know it. So yeah, I had no problem doing it, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. So everyone, I'm gonna do another one of these next week for Catherine and how the FGC kind of revitalized that. And if you have any stories of your own that you think would be nice to have on stream, either a cautionary tale or something inspiring, because I mean the last two have been a little
kind
less
of depressing.
Yeah. So it would be nice to get some lighthearted ones. Contact me on Twitter, CS, or join the Discord. It's linked in the description, hopefully. I don't know if Restream breaks that or not. But thanks a lot for joining us, and thanks Aya for again talking about Beast Fury and getting into the nitty gritty again. Hopefully you never have to really think about this again.
Yeah, so I blame you for this.
Yeah, it's my fault. I take full responsibility. All right, thanks everybody.
All right, guys.
See ya.
Later.